Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. I'm Spencer Simpson.
And I'm Kelton Howell, and this week we're going to be talking about redundancy in Commander decks.
Yes, and this week we're going to be talking about redundancy in Commander decks.
It feels just as bad the second time. We scripted that, and this is our second time recording the intro, and it was still just as cheesy.
No, yep, super corny, super dumb. Yours truly is responsible for that dumb joke. Anyways.
This is something that we've been thinking a lot about, and I'd say struggling with recently. It's been a hard thing to know how much redundancy do you want in a deck for a specific effect.
Yeah, as we were talking about this episode, it felt like our approach to redundancy had kind of been more art than science up until now, where you kind of get a feel for, as you're playtesting, how many of this effect do I want in my deck? Oh no, I drew like 5 copies of this effect and I only need 1. Sure. And so you kind of get it's like a feel thing more than a science thing. And we kind of wanted to start seeing if we could figure out if there's actual like numbers we could assign to these.
Yeah,
right?
Or at least get a starting point. Because when you're building a deck, I do think you should always refine and play test and see kind of where the deck is at and how many redundancies it wants. But I do want a starting point for when I'm deck building that I can think, okay, like this is a good starting point. Now I can play test. And we've done an entire series about this for each type of vegetable in a deck. And we feel like we got good answers for those. And for those who haven't listened to those episodes or don't remember, the vegetables are the things that every deck needs. They need land, they need ramp, they need interaction, they need card advantage. And generally speaking, we found that for ramp, interaction, card advantage, 13 was about the right number to be able to see 1 to 2 pieces of each of those in the early turns of a game.
Right. And then your deck also needs other effects. Like what if your deck needs a haste enabler? Or what if you need to create tokens? Or what if you need to put +1/+1 counters on creatures? Or double the +1/+1 counters you're putting on creatures? Like how many of those effects should you be running in your deck? And that's where we have kind of, again, it's been more art than science. And admittedly, we don't, even after our conversations and preparing for this episode, don't have all the answers. But we've been trying to work through it, and hopefully we can like point you in the right direction about where you want to be.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to split this into 2 categories. The main category of cards or effects that are part of the main theme of your deck, and then the other important effects of your deck that you may not want to see consistently in a game, but you do want to see probably at least once in the span of a game.
Yeah, you want to see it at least. You don't want to just... Yeah, exactly. Yep, so in terms of main theme, there are kind of 2 categories of cards that we're going to be talking about. The first are enablers, and the second is payoffs. So enablers are cards that enable you to do your strategy, to execute your strategy. So things like artifacts and enchantments are things that have enter the battlefield effects in Brago, and things like sacrifice outlet and sacrifice fodder in a deck like Jury. I guess we should probably read Brago and Jury.
So Brago, I'll read this one since I love Brago and I have a Brago deck. 2 white, blue for a 2/4 legendary creature, Spirit Noble with flying. And whenever Brago deals combat damage to a player, you exile any number of target non-land permanents you controlled and return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So Brago is super underwhelming. If you get Brago out and you deal combat damage and then you have nothing to blink. So those enablers are artifacts that you can then use for more mana in your second main phase, or enchantments that have really great enter the battlefield abilities that you get additional value off of.
Right, and in Jury Master of the View is black-red for a 1/1 that says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Jury Master of the Review, and when Jury dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So things that you can sacrifice to themselves or sacrifice outlets for other things and stuff to sacrifice fodder, are really important in Jury to keep your deck going. So those would be enablers for that strategy.
Yeah, and the second category of cards within your main theme are the payoffs. So these are the cards that benefit you when you execute on your strategy. So for example, in a +1/+1 counter deck, you might have Sage of Hours, 1 in a blue for a 1/1 human wizard. It has heroic, so whenever you cast a spell that targets Sage of Hours, you put a 1/1 counter on it. But the most important line here is you remove all 1/1 counters from Sage of Hours, and for each 5 counters removed this way, you take an extra turn after this one. So this is a payoff in a 1/1 counters deck in the sense that if you're able to create enough 1/1 counters consistently, you can take infinite turns, right? And that's like the win con of a deck like that.
Yeah, it's not enabling you to put +1/+1 counters on anything. Although I didn't realize it put counters on itself. That's
It does.
pretty cool.
Like, yeah, less frequently than other effects, but yes, it does.
Yeah, but ultimately it's like a payoff for putting +1/+1 counters on things, right?
Yeah.
Specifically itself. So for having things that do +1/+1 counters, or like another payoff would be like Pitiless Plunderer, which, yeah, I guess it's a payoff for sacrificing stuff. It's 3 and a black for a 1/4 human pirate. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure token. It's like probably one of the best. Yeah, I would call it a payoff for sacrificing stuff because you're getting treasures, right, to be able to cast other things.
You're not going to be sacrificing things in an aristocrat's deck if you're not getting any benefit out of doing that.
Right.
And this is the kind of benefit that you're looking for. That you're giving yourself a mana advantage.
Yep.
Yeah, so clearly you do need some balance of enablers and payoffs to get your deck to function, but it's really difficult to know the right amount for each one. So should you include more payoffs or more enablers? And that was something we discussed at length.
Yeah, like when I've built decks previously, I've added a bunch of, like we've talked about this a bunch, we add a bunch of cards in and we start cutting cards out until we get down to our 100 cards.
Yep.
And then we playtest a lot. And I think Kelton's right that playtesting is a really important part. That'll be something you both agree on because there's no such thing as like the exact right number for every deck, right? So you need to find what the deck wants to be playing or what your iteration of the deck wants to be playing. That being said, in your playtesting, you can find like, oh, I've got too many of this effect in hand, or I have too few of this effect in hand. And that's because we're playing a 100-card singleton format, that's always going to vary. But there's got to be some, for each deck, it's probably individual. But like in general, as we were talking about this, we thought there's got to be some like number that
or ratio.
Or ratio, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
That is going to let you see the right amount of effects. And clearly you're not going to see the best effects every time, right? But at least see some of those effects that will enable you to execute your own strategy.
Yeah, so it ultimately came down to answering the question, if I had any combination of these cards in my hands, what would be the worst case scenario?
Yes.
And that would be having all payoffs and no enablers, right?
Yes.
Because the payoffs are dead until you get an enabler. But if you have the enablers, then at least your deck can start doing something and then try and get the payoff.
Yes, like in an Aristocrats deck, I'm back on Jury because it's a deck I brewed recently, and I love Aristocrats strategies. In an Aristocrats deck, if you have your Pitiless Plunderers and your Grave Pacts and your whatever, like all of the stuff that is a payoff for sacrificing, and you have no way to sacrifice your stuff, you're just...
And nothing to sacrifice.
And nothing to sacrifice. You're like, okay, cool, pass turn, I guess. Whereas if you have all of these enablers, like Deadly Dispute or... Victimize even or whatever, right? You can start to at least sacrifice stuff, even if you would rather have kept it around and waited for something that was like making tokens for you to sacrifice or something.
Yeah. Because at least you're gaining incremental advantage.
Exactly. Like you're starting to go through your deck and find the stuff that you're looking for.
Yeah, so we looked through some of our deck lists and we tried to figure out what the actual right number ratio was. And for enablers, we think that is probably somewhere around 25. And that's probably the minimum that you want.
Yeah, in fact, just before the episode, we kind of asked ourselves again, is that the minimum? Could we like bump that down to 20? And really, I don't think 20 is enough at the end of the day to make sure
this is the main theme of your deck. This is what your deck is trying to do and what your deck needs to function. And you want a few of those during your first few turns. And that's what 25 is going to get you. Yeah,
you're virtually guaranteed to find a few enablers during the first few turns if you're running 25 or more. And then also throughout the course of the game, right? Because like it's also bad to only see a couple during your first few turns and then never see any more of them, right? Especially if they're... ephemeral is not the right word, but especially if they're just like one-time use effects or it's a creature. Like I keep thinking Aristocrats, you sacrifice the creatures and then they're gone, right? So you need to.
Yeah, you need more of them. You need more gas. I mean, this is the gas for your deck. It's what's going to get the machine going and then keep the machine running.
Yes. Yeah, and I guess we could do a quick aside too about typal decks. This is related in the sense that in a typal deck, creatures of the chosen creature type are your enablers for your strategy, right?
Yeah.
You will have sub-strategies going on, right? Whether that's like sacrifice in like a zombie deck or, I don't know, attacking, tapping for mana in an elf deck or whatever. But they are those creature types or things that create those creature types are your enablers. And the general wisdom is that you want 30 at a minimum. Now, this is like something I heard years ago from the command zone, but it's stuck with me.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, for sure. And you probably actually want that to be closer to 35 for things that are that type or make that type.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what I found. And I built we've talked about it several times on the channel, my Will Help the Rock Cleaver deck. Let me read Will Help really quick because I think it's relevant too.
Probably the best zombie commander.
Yeah, I would argue the best zombie commander. Yeah, so Will Help the Rock Cleaver is 2 blue-black for a 3/3 zombie warrior, and he says, whenever another zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a zombie. If you do, draw a card.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, if you build Will Help and you have 21 zombies in your deck, that is not, and things that make zombies, because that's relevant as well, because he doesn't care about actual zombie cards necessarily.
Permanent, like non-token creatures or whatever.
Right, exactly, right. You can make token zombies, and he's fine with that. But that's not enough. And I found that, like Kelton was saying, closer to 35, even at 30, it feels like not enough. There's like chance you will hit a zombie or 2 zombies. And ideally, you want to be hitting, 3, 4, 5, 3 to 5, right? Out of the many that you have in your deck, especially in the first 6, 7 turns.
So that's for enablers. And for payoffs, we think it's actually pretty similar to the number of vegetables that you should be running in a deck, 13, which is about half the number of enablers that you have. Yeah. And that just means that you're very likely to see 1 or 2 throughout the first few turns of the game. And you're not going to be stranded with them.
Right, yeah, and that's kind of been our philosophy with vegetables, right? Is 13 lets you see at least 1, but maybe 2 in the first couple turns. Yep. And that's the same thing you want with those payoffs, because it's fine to have your enablers and be doing stuff even with your enablers, but if you have a payoff as well, then you are really cooking, and your deck starts to do its thing really, really well.
So good. That category was the main theme of your deck, and the next category is the other important effects of your deck.
Yeah, with these effects, it's also important to have redundancies, right? You don't want to have like a card that does one thing for the most part. Like, by all means, put whatever you want in your decks.
Sure.
But like if you were trying to, like, haste enablers was a really good example, right? It's not an enabler, it's not a payoff, but if your deck wants your creatures to be hasty, then you will want some haste enablers in your deck, or your deck will want some protection. Most decks want some protection, but especially your deck might, because you have a key piece that you want to keep around. Or every deck will want some board wipes, but you don't want to have 3 board wipes in your hand because you don't have anything else to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually listening to an episode of the Command Zone earlier today, and when they were talking about some of the Bloomburrow cards that are really good to put in your deck. And they actually hit this topic when they were talking about Agate Instigator, which is 1 in a red for a 1/3 Lizard Rogue. It has Offspring 1 in a red, which means that you can pay an additional 1 in a red to make a 1/1 copy of this creature when it enters. But it has the ability, whenever another creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's funny because it's like Impact Tremors, but if you pay the Offspring, then it's like Perforos.
Yeah, sure.
But the thing they talked about was, if you're playing Perforos, then you're probably playing Impact Tremors, and if you're playing both those, you probably are putting Agate Instigator in your deck. Like, if you want that effect, then this is another copy of that effect, and you probably want that effect in your deck.
Interesting. I think I agree with that. I think it depends. If your strategy is, when creatures enter, I'm killing people, right? Like, that is...
I'm making a ton of creatures. Like, it's a payoff for a go wide deck, right?
And that does fall, I feel like, in like a payoff strategy, right? For your token maker decks.
Definitely.
But yeah, you do want... And I guess we'll cover this later, but you'll notice we're not talking about tutors right now, and we're going to cover that in a later section. And that's because in most of the power levels we're playing at, we're just playing like the next best version of that effect, rather than saying I'm tutoring Perforos. I'm also playing Agate Instigator, and I don't want to jump into that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of like these other effects that aren't enablers and payoffs, and even some of these, and not really those payoffs, like you said, because if you're playing Perforos and you're playing Impact Tremors, you're also playing Agate Instigator, because chances are you have enough enablers that you're going to get paid off for having any of those in your hand.
Yeah. Definitely.
Whereas if you have something like Rising of the Day, you also don't want to draw Fervor, right?
No, and the Perforos and Agate Instigator example, those compound, right?
Yes.
Those, if it's all of a sudden you're going from 2 damage a creature to 4 damage a creature,
right?
And that's awesome for your deck. You go, if you have Rising of the Day out and you play Fervor, which these are both enchantments that grant haste, that give your creatures haste.
They're the same cost, and they just say creatures you control have haste, and then Rising of the Day is just like a little better because it gives legendary creatures +1/+0.
Yeah. If you play those, now your creatures have double haste,
right?
Which means nothing,
right?
Which is not a thing. So these are the reason these are in a separate category is even though you do need several of them, you don't want more than one of them at the same time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The question we asked for the earlier one was, hey, what's the worst case scenario? And it's my hand is full of payoffs, right?
Yeah.
And in this one, the question we asked ourselves was, how would I feel if I had 2 of these in my hand at the same time?
Yeah, like 3 board wipes in your hand is pretty bad.
Yeah. And I think protection of the 3 we mentioned is probably the only exception to that of these 3 categories. There might be more where there's like an exception as well. We're not claiming to cover everything right. But with these 3 examples, you don't want 2 haste enablers because to Kelton's point, double haste is not doing much for you, right? It's not really helping you out in any way. So with these type of effects, generally we want to see with everything else, we want to see at least 1, right? With like vegetables, with payoffs, with enablers for sure. And for these type of effects, we probably want to see at most 1.
Yeah, so with that in mind, we landed on around 3 to 6 copies of these types of effects in a deck. And if you have 6 or more, they'd better be giving you some other utility as well. And I think this is maybe where something like Agate Instigator or Perforos comes into play, where, that is like a pretty narrow effect, and you only really need a few of them in your deck, but they are contributing to your main strategy. Lightning Greaves is really good protection, but you don't want just like all Lightning Greaves in your deck. It's just not gonna, that kind of protection is just not gonna compound very well. So for really narrow effects that aren't contributing greatly to the main strategy of your deck, 3 to 6 copies of an effect is more than enough.
Yeah, I think if we jump back to like the Rising of the Day example, right? Rising of the Day, 2 in a red, creatures you control have haste, and legendary creatures get +1/+0, right?
Yep.
And then Fervor is 2 in a red, creatures you control have haste. Like those are identical effects. You don't want too many of those. Now, like Kelton said, if you have 6 or more, they want to contribute to the strategy in some way. And I think what jumped to mind for me was something like Goblin Warchief, which is 1 red for a 2/2. Goblin spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast, and goblins you control have haste. So this is giving you a haste enabler. Like this was the reason I thought about this was because I had built a Krenko Mob Boss deck, right? Let me read Krenko really quick. Krenko Mob Boss is 2 red for a 3/3 and for Goblin Warrior, and he has tap, create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens where X is the number of goblins you control. So that haste is really important because first of all, having goblins is important, and then also having haste is very important because as soon as Krenko hits the battlefield, people are going to try to remove Krenko, and you want to be able to tap Krenko to create goblins.
Yeah. So this is an example of like you could potentially run more than 6 copies of that effect because they're stapled onto other things that your deck cares about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And to some degree, they're contributing to your main theme as well. But especially that first point, right? Right, exactly. Especially the first point that they're actually enablers for your main theme in terms of your typal synergies in this instance.
Yeah, exactly. That brings us to tutors.
Yes, so foreshadowed very lightly by me.
You can't talk about redundancy without talking about tutors. So what are tutors? Technically, these are anything that searches your deck for a card.
So Evolving Wilds.
Evolving Wilds is technically a tutor, right? Where it's searching your library for a basic land and putting it onto the battlefield. Most of the time, though, we're talking about things that are searching your deck for non-lands. So I think probably just like one of the most popular examples is Vampiric Tutor. which is 1 black for an instant. Shuffle your library. Search your card for a library, then shuffle.
Search your library for a card.
What did I say?
You said search your card for a library.
Okay, take 3. Search your library for a card, then shuffle and put that card on top. You lose 2 life. Yeah, so this is a card that for 1 mana, you get any card in your library on top.
Yep, on top of your deck. And typically you're doing that at end step, so it virtually goes to your hand, right?
Sure.
Yeah, the way we've talked about redundancy so far is that most of the redundancy, it's other versions of effects. Like you're playing the best version, and then the second best version, and then the third best version.
So Rising of the Day and Forever.
Right, exactly. Tutors are the ultimate form of redundancy. They are like an additional copy of the best version of the effect. So you're playing the best version, and then a tutor, which is also that best version, because you can go get it.
And not only of that effect, but of any effect. So whichever effect you need at that point in the game. So as a result of that, including tutors does tend to increase the consistency and also the power of your deck.
Yeah, it's because like Kelton said, it's finding the best version of that effect. And if you have that in your hand, you're getting the next best thing or whatever you need in that moment. We are not against tutors in general. I think tutors. we should. Yeah, we love it. We love playing tutors. But we don't think they belong in low to mid power decks. So that would be like power levels 1 through 3 on our scale, right?
Yeah, and why is that? It's because if you think through, well, what are you getting with your tutor? Tutors, you're probably looking for something specific, and it's probably a combo piece. It's probably a really high value engine piece for your deck, or just like the best effect for a deck. And that's going to push your deck to the max power level that it can perform at.
Yeah, I mean, because it is, like Kelton was saying, I'm going to repeat this another time, redundancy is the theme of this episode, is that it's an additional copy of that best version of your effect, and then if you already have that, it's finding the next best thing. So I think a perfect example of this is my Will Help the Rock Cleaver deck, which I really was trying to be very intentional about building at a 3 power level, a mid power, right?
Yeah.
A 3 on our scale. And it has felt like it performed significantly better than that, meaning that it performs at around a mid high or a 4. Even though it's not playing some of the cards that I would want to include in a mid high power level deck, right?
Yes.
And we talked about this at length several times about what is the problem card in this deck, what is making it feel like it's just outperforming other decks that we think would be a 3. Because it was a pretty laborious, I was pretty, scrupulous, I guess would be the word, about making sure I built this deck as a 3. And I think the one that slipped through the cracks and we ended up landing on that is really pushing the power level of the deck up is Sidisi Undead Vizier. So Sidisi Undead Vizier is 3 black for a 4/6 zombie Naga. So it's on theme, and I felt like, cool, it's a zombie. I'll put it in my deck. It's a big zombie. It has Death Touch and it has Exploit. Again, kind of on theme because it lets me sacrifice stuff. The last part is the most important part here. When Sidisi Undead Vizier exploits a creature, and keep in mind Sidisi can exploit herself, you may search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library.
Yeah, so you may say, okay, this is a 5 mana tutor, and in high powered decks, a 5 mana tutor is not good. But even in a mid power deck, even at 5 mana, this is good. And it's great because you can recur it from the graveyard. Yeah. And so it's actually like a recurable tutor. So I think the card that you want to get most with Sidisi when you're playing this deck is Kindred Discovery, right?
Yes.
Which 100%. Is 3 blue. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. It's an enchantment. And whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card. So just drawing tons of cards. Let's say you have Kindred Discovery in your hand. Well, then you're getting Rooftop Storm.
Yes.
Right? Which is 5 and a blue for an enchantment. You may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a zombie creature spells you cast. Let's say you have that in your hand. Then what card are you getting? You're getting Noxious Ghoul, which is 3 black for a 3/3 zombie, and whenever it or another zombie enters the battlefield, all non-zombie creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn.
So I can feel the frustration oozing from you.
Oh man, it's yeah, and it's just because these are the best cards in the deck, right? Kinder
100%.
Discovery, Rooftop Storm, Noxious Ghoul. Sidisi is an extra copy of every one of those cards.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, and I joke about the frustration, but like it was
Yeah.
frustration for me too, and whoever was piloting. I mean, yeah, mostly for me because regardless who was piloting the deck, I wanted everyone to have a fun time, right? And it to feel even and fair. And so we kept bouncing back and forth about well, should you take Kinder Discovery out? Maybe it's too powerful for a 3, and it's like okay, but like what else am I going to put Kinder Discovery in than a Typal deck, right?
Yeah, a zombie deck.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what about Rooftop Storm? That's like pretty busted. Yeah, but like when else am I playing Rooftop Storm?
It's a zombie card.
Or Noxious Ghoul, right? They're all cards that like only would go in a zombie deck. And does that mean zombie decks have to be a power level 4 deck because they have these cards? We don't think so. No. What ended up being the problem was the fact that I had multiple copies of each of those, right?
Yeah.
And anything else, right? It's not just those 3.
On
Any
a
other
tutor
card.
that you could recur. So you could like pretty consistently get all 3 of those out. And once you have all 3 of those out, it's very difficult to deal with because you are simultaneously drawing so many cards, playing so many zombies, and wiping the board asymmetrically.
Yeah.
And like that's a very difficult board state to come back from. So I think as cool as Sidisi is in the deck, I think you're planning on taking Sidisi out.
I am. Yeah, I'm going to look for a replacement because while that is the strategy and the dream of the deck is to do that, Sidisi was letting me do that far too consistently. And
but that's not to say you couldn't draw into Kindred Discovery, Rooftop Storm, and Noxious Ghoul. Normally,
I'd be totally happy to do that. And
that's
again,
when the deck gets really exciting. That's like the best possible outcome for that deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're total advocates for consistency. If you've watched any of our episodes, like that's all we really want to do is build decks that perform consistently, but within certain constraints, right? And so this is performing too consistently for the power level that this is performing too powerfully too consistently for the power level I wanted to build at.
And I actually think that that leads us very well into our next point, which is about sandbagging. And when we talk about tutors, you may say, and I'll say I said this like last week, but I'm just looking for a pet card or a jank card that my deck is built around. Like it's not, the tutor is in there because I have this very narrow card in the deck that I want to get out. Sure. And that could be fine. But if you already have that card, you're just getting the next best thing, right? Or if you're in a really bad place and you're about to lose, or the board state's out of control, and you draw a tutor, like you kind of just want to get a board wipe, right? Because that's the correct choice for the game. So you end up sandbagging if you're running tutors, saying I'm only gonna tutor for like one of the least powerful cards in my deck for an inefficient card. In many ways, you just end up sandbagging, and I think that's something that neither of us like.
Yeah, it just feels bad. Like the feeling of, hey, like I had this tutor hand, I could have gone and got this, but I didn't, or whatever.
Yeah, then everyone's like, why didn't you just go get it?
Yeah, I mean,
like my win, it cheapens my win.
Yeah, admittedly, I did that the other day. I played. We talked about this in our last episode. My Vadric Astral Archmage deck, right? Archmage, I don't know
which
how
you knew
it.
was a power level outlet.
Which I knew was a power level outlet, and I told everybody, hey, it was a 5-player game too, and we were kind of playing in between rounds, and I was like, sweet, I'm just gonna bust this out. This will win very quickly, and I promised someone that I wouldn't win on my turn, right? And I won on the turn before, like, but on my turn I went through all the steps to be like, look, here's what it does. But I don't win right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that just like feels super bad. So
yeah,
I really think this sandbagging idea we kind of thought about as we were putting together this episode, and really I think it is has been a guiding factor in most of our thought processes and philosophies around deck building. Mm-hmm. Is that we
don't sandbag in deck building so that you don't have to sandbag when you're playing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and we're also trying not to sandbag in deck building, right? Like the idea is we are deck building to constraints, which is not sandbagging. We're deck building to a specific constraint, to a specific power level. And then you don't have to sandbag in a game. You can play your best game of Magic, and then the chips fall where they may, right?
Build the best version of the deck within the constraints, and then play the best version of that deck that you draw into.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
So for tutors, we really think that these in our pod, in our play groups that we play, in our decks that we build, generally only belong in 4s and 5s, which are high mid and high power level decks. And so in high mid, you're probably going to see more narrow tutors that are tutoring for cards that synergize with that strategy or theme, but don't necessarily outright win the game.
Yep.
And then at high power levels in 5s, you're looking to win as efficiently as possible. So I mean, you're running any tutors you want to try and get the most powerful thing that your deck is trying to do, and within your strategy or theme.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the difference between casual and CEDH, right?
Right.
Is you're still trying to win the way that your deck is trying to win within a theme, and yeah, I mean, go for it. Pedal to the metal.
Absolutely. Well, like we said, we're not against tutors. We actually have been wanting to play more high power recently. We've been trying to encourage our friends to proxy so we can play more high power, because we do like tutors in those play patterns.
Love them.
But when we're building our low to mid power decks, we're just playing the second best version of the effect instead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm building a deck right now that has a one of card. Like, the deck is built around an effect, and there's only one effect in Magic, or one card in Magic that has that effect. And I had to go through the process of saying, okay, do I play tutors? Do I build around this one effect so heavily that I need to play tutors, and that pushes up the power level of the deck? Or do I build the deck where, great, if I get that card, it's awesome, and the deck gets to do something really cool. But if I don't, it still has something to do. It has other things going on in the deck that it can rely on.
Yeah,
and I think that's where I landed.
I was gonna ask, where did you land? You landed on the ladder?
I think so. Just because I don't get to play as many high power games.
Yeah.
Like,
and you do want to play this deck more. This might make it.
And I think I want to play this deck more. I think it's really fun. I think I could build both versions of the deck though and be perfectly happy. I think you could do both.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say though, I wonder if it will enrich the experience of being able to cast that card and do that card's thing. Should we just talk about what that card is and what the deck is? We're kind of being cryptic about it, but
yeah, that's fine. I guess we're not running too long on this episode. So this came about while I was thinking about cards that I like playing in Cube that don't have a place in Commander and don't really see play in Commander. And I thought about the card Dream Halls. So Dream Halls is 3 blue for an enchantment. Rather than pay the mana cost for a spell, its controller may discard a spell that shares a color with that spell. So it gives every card in your hand an alternative casting cost of discarding a card that shares a color with it. And I thought, well, okay, that would be a really cool card to build a Commander deck around, and it doesn't really see tons of play in Commander. So which Commander would this go well with? And the answer is pretty clearly, I think, Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer. Do you want to read that one?
Yes, this is one I actually wanted to build. I thought it was so cool.
It's cool.
And then got worried that it would pull you towards higher power, actually. We talked about this when you were wanting to build it. It's Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer is 3 blue-black for a 3/3 legendary creature, human wizard. And he says, this spell costs 1 less to cast for each different mana value among cards in your graveyard.
And mana value is different than
Well, no, actually, now I'm...
No.
Now,
yeah, I was going to say, wait, we thought about this at the beginning.
because some
mana
things do
value
say
is just
mana cost.
Mana cost and mana
I
value
misled you. That is my fault.
That's
I
okay.
didn't read
it's
it.
Still a great
it was,
card.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter that much.
Yep. And then whenever you discard a non-land card, you may cast it from your graveyard is the next part of that.
So the idea is that if you can get out Dream Halls, then I can discard a card as a cost to play a card. Then I get a trigger from Oscar on the card that I discarded, and I can play that card. And so then I can discard another card from my hand to play that card. And then I get another Oscar trigger. And so it just kind of like fills the stack with all these free casts. And so the idea is draw a bunch of cards from your deck, or have a bunch of things that draw you cards as you're casting spells, and then just keep playing them for free and just kind of play out your hand. And that seems really cool. And I think Dream Halls would be a really cool card to build around. But it's obviously like a very narrow effect in the game. And so the question is, okay, do I build Oscar as an Oscar deck and I just put Dream Halls in it? Or do I build a Dream Halls deck and
Oscar's
with Oscar
the
as the commander?
Sure.
Yeah. And so I have to run a lot of tutors and stuff to consistently get out Dream Halls.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
and then the conundrum was, like we've been saying, well, what if you draw dream halls, or you tutor for dream halls, and now you have like 5 other tutors in hand? Well, now you're just tutoring for every other next best card in your deck, right?
Yeah, and that's why
for
it really
free once
pushes.
you get dream halls out too.
That's why it really pushes you. Yeah, and the next best card is probably Peer into the Abyss, where you're
Right,
drawing
or
half
like
your
Force
deck
of
and then
Will,
playing
which we
half of
talked
your
about,
deck.
like if you were pushing the power level up, right? So
Yeah, so it just very naturally pushes the power level up higher with that strategy if you're just running a lot of tutors, because it feels bad to sandbag a tutor. You just don't want to do it.
It does. It really does. So ultimately, you landed on building an Oscar deck with dream halls in it, and
I think so.
Like I was saying, I think it will be very fulfilling to be able to do the dream halls thing naturally,
occasionally. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other really cool cards that work well with Oscar that you don't play in other decks. And so by building an Oscar deck rather than a Dream Halls deck, I get to play those cool cards too.
Yeah, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Even if you don't get to do the Dream Halls, Peer into the Abyss, put almost every card in your deck onto the battlefield, right?
Yeah, like I've been looking for a place to play Rona, Herald of Invasion, which is a really cool looter card that transforms into this big trampoline thing. And I've been wanting to play that in a deck for a while, and this is the perfect deck for that.
Yeah, very, very cool. I love it. So, how much redundancy should you run? Well,
how much redundancy should you run?
Yes, full circle. We did it. It really depends on how much you want to see a card. So 25 to 35 for cards that are part of your main theme and you want to see a lot of, right? 13 to 16 of cards that you want to see a couple of, and then 3 to 6 of cards that you want to see at most one of for the most part.
Yeah, and these are not hard and fast rules, but it hopefully gives you a place to start and take some of the guesswork out of deck building and including redundant effects in your deck.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you, everybody. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for consistently listening. Thank you for checking us out for the first time. If you're here for the first time, please like and subscribe. It has been so helpful, and we've felt just so excited about the future of this podcast, and we're just grateful for everyone that has done so far, and we're grateful for you if you do it now. And if you don't, we're also grateful for you, but we'd appreciate it if you would.
Yeah, we post weekly, so we hope to see you next week. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on the commanderpod.com. You can reach out to us there if you have anything you'd like to say. We also love when you comment, so go ahead and let us know what kind of redundancies you play in your deck, and if you think I should build a high power or a low power Oscar deck.
Yeah. Yes, please. I'm excited to see what people think. That'll be fun.
Yeah. No, it's true. I'd actually really love to hear what you think. Maybe, maybe I build both. We'll see.
Yeah. Could do both. Porque no los dos, as they say.
Porque no los dos. Well, eat your vegetables, everybody. And until next time, remember to always pay the one.